Christ fulfilled the law to love God and to love man. This is what the Pharisees had been defective in doing. The allusion to the scribes and the Pharisees with their defective righteousness spoke very plainly to its own meaning. But without love, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13, we're nothing. We're just not making the law of love the basis of his covenant, but making it the standard of his covenant. Without the Old Testament understanding, man had been confused into thinking that God was stern and harsh, and that there was nothing that man could do in order to be pleasing to God. But a new standard of love was coming, the love of one another as Christ had loved us. Such love is made a distinguishing characteristic of Christ's covenant. But the Pharisees and the Sadducees had taught the strictest limitations of the law. And instead of man loving one another, we were supposed to be disobedient to the law of God in adulterating that love, to be miserably owned by their traditions. Nothing of a life giving spirit could have been from or in them. Man was hopelessly shut out of the kingdom of God on the earth from the church, of which Christ was sketching the doctrine and the discipline that was to come, and showing that through his death, burial, resurrection, and an ascension, he was going to have a foundation that man could find obedience to God and peace with God, that he could live as Christ had commanded. And he demonstrated in his life the perfect love for God by giving the perfect obedience to God. Before this, there had been no such perfect example and no such complete revelation. Christ said, though, I came to fill full the law. I came to show it could be done. I came to make sure that man could see that the Christian way of living would be different. So Jesus goes through some things that men have been confused by. And as they're confused, it seems to be paradoxical to what God had taught from the Old Testament covenant. But when you let man devise the rules and the regulations by which God is the judge and the standard of all things, you get kind of confused with what is taught. So, what people do as they are instructed by this, they see that the adulterated version causes what seemingly was contradiction. Personal rage or anger with a person, that person who was a creature of God, and therefore maybe even one's own brother, was that which the Pharisees accepted. But anger with sin and anger with man's offense to God and the mischief which he had done to be disobedient to God had allowed them to come up with a defensive and instinctive monetary resentment, or they got to pay in order to get their sins satisfied. Anger permitted them to express itself in the shape of utter contempt for the person. It's illustrated by the comparison of contempt and disdain and mockery and all, even for their own very family, so they could be in anger and call their brother a fool, and they thought it was okay. But Christ dignifies the concord of brothers on the earth and lets us know that heaven takes special note respecting the way brothers work with brothers and makes it its own cause. The New Testament would be on record as saying, if you hate your brother, you're a murderer. The gift of God cannot be laid on the same altar by the person who hates his brother and think it to be accepted. While upon the other altar, the altar of the offerer's heart, false fire burns. God is offended. It cannot escape the notice of the loved and the beloved disciples of Jesus' day that what Jesus was something that was completely different to what man had been and man had been taught. And so he treasured up a spirit of love. So he would say, you can't hate your brother. You've heard that it was said of them of old time, thou shalt not kill. And in verse 21, he says, in reference to this, that whosoever hateth his brother without a cause is the one that's the subject of this declaration. In so doing, we understand that Jesus' teachings represents what God had commanded. But if people don't understand this, they don't know what Jesus was talking about when the blessed had turned into something other than a blessing, which they'd never be able to comprehend. So Jesus said, I say unto you, even if you're angry with your brother without a cause. Now, those who were angry with their brother thought, according to the laws of the Pharisees and Sadducees, that was something that they could do, and it was satisfactory to God. But the law that Christ taught, the law that Christ came to mitigate to the world, would not allow that. You see, when I was a little boy, my daddy used to bring my brother and I in if we'd have trouble one with another and set us down. And one of the phrases that he always came up with, I've never forgotten. He'd say, sons, dogs fight, brothers don't. The meaning of this was greatly understood in that we were to love each other. No, we weren't going to be living perfectly and all concord and agreement, but there was one thing that would always be a principle that we'd be involved in, and that was to have respect and love one another. So Jesus would say, it's been said of them of old time, thou shalt not kill. And whosoever shall kill shall be in danger of the judgment. But I say unto you that whosoever is angry with his brother, for you see, this all starts somewhere, and the end is destruction. Then in verse 23, Jesus goes on to say, and this is confusing to a lot of people because we're going to get down here where if somebody hits you on the right cheek, turn to the left, and they're going to say, well, I don't understand that. That's contradictory. That's paradoxical. Well, listen to verse 22. I say unto you that whosoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whosoever shall say to his brother Raca shall be in danger of the council. And whosoever shall say thou fool shall be in danger of hell fire. And therefore, if they bring thy gift to the altar, and there rememberest there thy brother that you have aught against him, leave there thy gift before the altar, and go thy way. First be reconciled to thy brother, then come and offer the gift. Jesus was teaching that we're to love one another. I know that this is something that people have worn out because they've not understood exactly what the Lord was speaking about. And as not understanding it, they're contradicting what Christ commanded. As we have the teachings of Jesus Christ and his law, and we know exactly what he's being referencing, then we'll see that the Pharisees and the Sadducees had misunderstood the law of God. And the stern discipline and the reaction to it had caused them to be haters of men who they saw as competition, whom they saw as ones who didn't go along with everything they liked. whom they recognized that under the Old Testament law, according to what they defined it as, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. We'll continue this because there's more to be taught and understood, and we all need to understand what the Lord was meaning when he was teaching that we're to love one another.